So how this all started is I'm with Wine Diva Deb and a group of our friends. So there's 16 of us, well, 17 of us. And everyone asked me the same questions. And so I was like, well, Deb, why don't I put on a presentation and then all my friends can know what I did? Well, then Deb said, well, let's talk to Philip and Stephen. So thank you for letting us be here and using this great technology and my little headset. So I am a captain up in Seattle. About 8 years ago, I went through midlife crisis and said, what can I do with the rest of my life? And a company that I would charter sailboats with, San Juan Sailing, said, get your captain's license. So I went and got my Coast Guard license and also my American Sailing Association credentials and started teaching. And this woman here, Diana, she decided to be my first student, or fate brought us together. And then she went and bought this boat, and we went to Alaska together in 2014. So we went from Seattle to Sitka. Her husband likes sailing. They've been married 30 years, but he doesn't want to do offshore, and he still likes to work. He's kind of crazy that way. So he has a software company in Seattle that he likes to go to work. So then, fast forward a little bit, Diana and I were at the boat show, and we sat through these great seminars, sailing from Seattle to California, from Mexico to the Marquesas, from the Marquesas to New Zealand. And that night I got an email, and it said, I have a boat, I have the time, there's no grandchildren yet, why not? And I wrote back and said, nothing on my calendar, I'll go with you. So we left on, well, we had to do a lot of prep, so I'll share that with you here. The boat Arctic Loon was a boat to go to Alaska, so it had these great fuel tanks, it had great water tanks, but it didn't have solar, it didn't have a water maker, and we had to get specific sails. We also needed emergency equipment like a 6-person offshore raft, and then satellite equipment so we could talk to people because there's no Coast Guard in the middle of the ocean. And of course, we had to pick a route and figure out how to read weather. And we took all kinds of seminars. But one of our greatest resources was John Guswell. And I don't know if any of you are from Canada, but he, in the early 50s, when he was 25 years old, he built a 20-foot boat and sailed around the world for 4 years. He is still holds the record for the smallest boat ever to circumnavigate. Well, his wife, Dorothy, right here, happens to be one of my friends, so it was great having them as a resource as we were preparing. And we had decided we were on a tight schedule. We were going to sail from Seattle to the Marquesas, cross the Pacific, and then we learned there's weather windows, there's crazy storms that we wouldn't want to get caught in, so we ended up changing our plan, and we started up in Seattle, up in the northwest corner. We went down the whole west coast to Mexico. We had to winter in Mexico because you can't cross until March. In March, we crossed over the Marquesas. We spent 90 days there. Then we worked our way to the Cook Islands, Niue, and the boat is in Tonga right now. And you're probably wondering, I haven't made it to New Zealand. What am I doing here? Well, if you're Deb's friend, she plans years in advance. So 2.5 years ago, we signed up for this cruise. So when Diana and her husband were talking to me about this trip, I said, well, I have to leave for a few weeks and go to Japan. And they're like, what? So that's what we did. So we decided, being that we had never done this before, we would participate in rallies. So the first rally we did is from Seattle to San Francisco, and we were one of 9 boats. You'll see our name at the bottom there. And a friend of mine started this rally because the most treacherous water is actually from Seattle to San Francisco. So if we were going to make that, we would probably make it all the way to New Zealand. So they gave us classes and mentorship, and this was our crew. We decided we were going to be a girl boat in general, but we decided to start with some friends of ours. So Greg in the middle there and his stepson Bartek, they owned a boat in our charter fleet, and Greg wants to retire with his wife and go offshore, so he wanted some offshore experience. Then Mike down here, he had never sailed, he had retired, and he heard me talking about the trip, and he pursued us for a year to be our crew. At the end, he thanked us, and he said, Anne, I'll do any adventure with you, but I don't think I want to go offshore again. So we set off. We left the Straits of Juan de Fuca, also known as the Straits of Juan de Puca. And Bartek, who you just saw there, got sick, and he was deathly sick. He just laid. He was our youngest. He had drones with him. He was going to document our whole trip, and he was so sick he just laid there. So we were about 36 hours after starting. We had gone all night. It was the next morning. I was asleep because you do watches. And I came outside and I'm like, you guys, it's 25 knots of wind. Why haven't you reefed? And reefing is lowering the amount of sail you have out. And they said, oh, well, we were thinking about it. And the rule is when the first person thinks about it, you do it. So we go to reef the sail, and the bail under the boom breaks, and our reefing system breaks. And now we've got 6-foot seas, 25 knots, building to 30, and we all have to go out to the mast and try to bring down the sail. And we called this our airbag because then it had to live inside the boat because it was too rough to fold it up. So we decided to go into Newport, Oregon, because we were off of Astoria when this happened. We were about 80 miles offshore. And Bartek was the happiest person in the world. When he heard that we were going to Newport, he's like, I'm going home to Bellingham. I'm not staying on this boat. So we went into Newport. We found out we couldn't get our sail fixed, which is okay because we're going to go downwind and you can sail with just the jib. But the good news is our friends that we had met on Nomad, they're from Anacortes, they had continued on and they were about 12 hours ahead of us. They got 50-knot winds, 15-foot seas, unexpected. They took all their sails down and they basically were surfing at 8 knots. So we were very happy our angels on the bow were helping us out by breaking our boat, so we had to go in. And I want to play this short little video here. Of the offshore community. Just cruising along San Francisco's outer area. Can't really hear it. Hoping that the winds don't go too much higher and that the seas don't get as big as last night. But it is a good life as long as you have good crew and a good boat. And sunshine.
This is Anne Alberg on Arctic Loon. 28-knot winds and 8-foot seas. Just a Thursday afternoon at our new office.
So what we learned is you can never document when things are getting crazy. So that didn't look like 8-foot waves. At some point, they get 12 to 13 feet, and they are higher than our solar panels. And so we had quite a trip down the coast. So the best day for some people on our boat, well, Bartek's was the other day, but this was Mike's best day, and he just went, oh my, we made it. So we came into San Francisco and opened a bottle of champagne, because we have a rule, no drinking out at sea. So then we stayed in San Fran, tried to do some boat repairs, and then we left again. This time we had one of my students, this is Jordan, and Jordan has a dream of going offshore. So we used my former students and friends and family for crew. And it was beautiful out there off of California. We went to Catalina, which I had never been to, and then we staged in San Diego. And we decided to participate in the next rally, but this was 164 boats. And we were going to travel all the way down to the Baja with them. We decided to be an all-girl boat. We were of 164 boats. There were 2 all-girl boats. And right when we were leaving the harbor, we were doing this parade, one of the battleships came through and started honking at us and made 164 boats get out of their way. So obviously they weren't paying attention that we were coming to town. So a nice part about these rallies is you do seminars. So there I am learning celestial navigation, but we also learned that it's a little complicated and we're too busy out there to really focus. We should have learned how to do that before we ever left Seattle. And a part of the Baja is stopping at 2 different places along the coast. The first one, we do a softball game, and we all get buy mitts and baseballs and bats, and then we play softball with the kids, and then we donate all the gear to the kids, and they have a great time. And they're actually pretty good, and some of the cruisers got together and raised money, and they built a softball field. So this isn't how it's always looked there. This is a town in the middle of nowhere in Mexico. And then they bring in a band at another stop, and a restaurant brings in their crew, and they put on a party for us. And of course, we love the Mexican food. It's one of the benefits of being there because there's palapalas all over the beaches. And we didn't want to stay in Mexico, but we had to stay waiting for our weather window in March. So this is Diana's son, Casey. He's 23. He came and spent 3 weeks with us. We went up the Sea of Cortez. We were always searching for the blue-footed booby, and the brown-footed booby found us, sat on our boat, and took us to where the blue-footed boobies all lived there on that island. And the pelicans were amazing. This is our friend Marcia from Microsoft, who now has retired. I think she saw that there's another life by coming and spending 3 weeks with us. And one of my highlights of the trip was in Mexico, the mayor in La Paz asked us to put on a Christmas parade. So the locals put on a car Christmas parade, which was the next night, and we went to. It was phenomenal. But they had never done a boat parade. Well, I'm from Seattle Seahawks, and we meet Santa Claus, and he has a Seahawk boat, and he's decorating it. So I volunteered to help decorate it, and he took Diana and our friends, and we were his reindeer. It was the most amazing thing. As we went along the Malecon, people would flash their lights and yell, "It's Santa Claus," and kids would scream and yell, and it got me so emotional I started crying because it was so cool to be a part of Santa Claus's trip through La Paz. Well, then Jordan came back, and this time he brought his girlfriend Erica, and they're going to go offshore. So they wanted to test out going from the southern tip of Sea of Cortez over to Mazatlan. The funny part is Erica loved it. 3 o'clock in the morning, 35 knots wind, heeled all the way over. She was just out there smiling. She didn't even want to go to bed. And she's a great cook, so we had Christmas together, and she made us a lot of good meals. So then we stayed in Pacific Mexico, which is Mazatlan down to Puerto Vallarta, for about 3 months. And we practiced our cooking skills. This is Diana's daughter, Emma, who left the Peace Corps, and she came and joined us for 5 months. So she was actually with us all the way to the Marquesas. And I'm making zucchini fritters. And Puerto Vallarta was where we based ourselves, but then we started running into a lot of boat problems. So we had alternator problems and regulator problems. And when you try to fix things in a foreign country, finding and speaking the language and then getting the parts you need. So we had friends come visit us so they could bring us the parts. And here we are working on the boat. We sent Emma up the mast. And we were preparing for our next weather window, which we decided to do the puddle jump rally. And it is 200 boats, anywhere from Colombia all the way up to Vancouver, people crossing the Pacific. And so we decided our weather window was going to be March 23rd. I hired a weather router from Hawaii. Being this was our first time, I didn't want to make any mistakes, because if you saw our boat, it isn't an offshore cruiser. It's a charter boat cruiser. So we didn't think we could weather 50-knot winds and 15-foot seas. So here's the puddle jump. You can see people leave from all over, and our goal was the Marquesas. It was going to be 2,800 miles and probably 24 to 28 days. Oh, and I threw this in. One of the funny parts of being a girl boat is when the immigration come on the boat, if there's a male, they address the male and they start talking to him, and the male will say, "I'm not the captain," and they don't say, "Who is the captain?" They say, "Where is the captain?" Because it's all females, so they wouldn't be. And then when we say it's Diana, they go, "Oh." And then another little side of it is Diana's last name is Trump. So she hands the paperwork over, and especially in Mexico, I had made a mistake on our paperwork, and I said, "Are we going to have a hard time leaving your country?" And they go, "With your last name? No." So now we're out in the Pacific Ocean, And we have our weather router, and he had given us some guidance. And I told him two things. We want to be safe and we want to be comfortable. So it was just stunning out there. And we had another boat we were kind of cruising with. We couldn't see them, but they were Agatha, and they were out of Seattle as well. And we also had our friend, this is our other crewmate. This is Crosby. And Crosby's great. He doesn't require any food. He doesn't need to sleep. And he's usually very reliable. So that is our steering wind vane, because our steering mechanism, our autopilot, broke about 4 days into our trip. So we were very happy to have this. Here we are. Diana's checking the weather. And we got very lucky. You can see that picture's a little better over there. We were always outrunning squalls, and we felt as if we were playing a video game on our radar, because we would see the squall coming and you'd have to figure out how to get away from it. So on the equator, you have the ITCZ, which is where the squalls happen. Our weather router had us turn down to cross the equator at 119 longitude. Our friends on that other boat, Agatha, were told by their weather router, a different one, to go at 129. And when I told our weather router, he said, pray for your friends. We got so lucky. The most that happened to us was boat breakdowns. Every day we were fixing something on our crossing, but we were in contact with Agatha, and they were having 25 to 30 knot sustained winds for 2 days at a time. They were having 20-foot seas. They had 2 cats on board, and they said the cats just hunker down and look up at the humans like, what are you doing to us? And then Bill thought he got shingles, but we had a medical book, and luckily he got laundry soap from Mexico in his clothes, and it got him sick. Oh, okay. So one of the traditions when you're in the Navy is to do the crossing of the equator, so we had to have our own little celebration, and one of the little boys we met from Vancouver, he made a package for us. It had that picture he had drawn for us. It had some chocolate. And then, of course, we had to open a bottle of champagne, because you have to give King Neptune a little. And again, we don't drink out there, but we had a little sip. So we continued on. We had a great crossing, and we made it to the Marquesas. We landed on April 18th, and we were a little slower than the other boats because, again, we're not a race boat and we're not an offshore boat. But we were very happy to be there. And if you're not familiar with French Polynesia, there's 5 different island sets, but we went to 3 of them. We started in the Marquesas, spent 30 days. 30 days in the Tuamotu Atolls, and then 30 days in the Society Islands, and our visa was only good for 90 days. We arrived the day before Easter, and we were told to go to church because the music is so spectacular. And so we went to church, had a phenomenal time, and we got invited to these people's house for their Easter brunch, and the food was amazing. And I didn't tell you, Diana's vegetarian, so we eat vegetarian on the boat. So here was ham in the rice, there was coconut fish, there was coconut chicken, and in that big pan up in the corner was this shredded pork that was the best I've ever had. And you know you've made it to the South Pacific when you buy bananas and hang them off the back of your boat. So now we finally got internet. So if you go look at our website, we don't post very often because we rarely have good enough internet. This is Bill from Agatha and his daughter Rose. And I'm going to just flip through some pictures. This is how beautiful the South Pacific was. We had rainbows all the time, the bungalows over the water. We have 2 kayaks that we can cruise around in. And the water is that beautiful, that stunning. And there's the bungalows over in Bora Bora. So, this is what people think we do on the boat, is lie around. But the truth is, we do a few fun things. We go hiking, we play, this is Settlers of Catan. We have artist friends come, and Diana's son taught us how to make a shell mobile. There I am kayaking. But what we really are doing is planning our route and planning the weather. So if you look at that, this is Navionics, or I'm sorry, this is our offshore predict wind. We don't want to be in those red areas. We also don't want to be in the blue areas because that's no wind and we're a sailboat. But we always have chores to do when we go to shore. So this is us. There's no gas stations that you can just pull up to the docks. You have to have jerry cans. You have to go, someone has to drive you in a car to the gas station. You got to fill them up, then you got to go back to your dinghy, and then you got to go back to your boat. We learned you can't pour on a boat that's doing this. So someone taught us a trick with straws, and you put a hose and you take straws and blow it in. It creates a suction, and you can fill up the fuel tank. Now, there's Diana. One day on our crossing, we had so many things break. Every day it was something. One day she goes, if something breaks today, it's not getting fixed. But one of the ones that had to get fixed is we had someone on board say, smells like fuel, diesel. And we're like, boats smell like diesel. Well, then we decided to look, and under my bunk, and I had a cushion so I wasn't smelling it, but you could smell it from the other cabin, is our sensor had worked its way loose, I guess the vibration, and there was a lot of fuel under my bed. So, and that's out in the middle of the ocean with 6-foot waves, and so very fun to figure out how to fix things that there's no Google, so we can't do a YouTube to figure out how to fix it. So there we are working on our anchor, and then our anchor chain, we should have replaced it, we didn't. We could have galvanized it, we didn't, and we decided to reverse it. So now our new chain is being used at the anchor, and the old yucky chain is inside the anchor locker. We learned this, and you've probably seen that before. Every day we felt like we were learning a new lesson. We made a lot of friends. This happens to be one of my captains up in Seattle that I teach with, and one day we're in San Francisco, and he starts yelling at me, and he had hitched a ride on that powerboat because they needed extra crew. And of course, the people we would meet would give us fish, and Diana would let me bring it on board. And then we would have more boat projects. So that part that broke up off of Oregon, we hadn't fixed it yet, and we had to order a new part. And someone had to deliver that to us. So we met this couple that had been in those heavy seas, and we told them that we were going to install this part into our mast. Well, he has a company up in Anacortes with 40 employees, and he said to his wife that night, we're showing up tomorrow morning because those girls are never going to install that. Well, it turned out the part needed to be filed down, and he kind of knew that, so it pays to have friends. And I kind of got mad because the men were always showing up at our boat saying, what project are you working on today? So I was kind of feeling that they were doing that because they didn't think we could do it. Well, it turned out they were so impressed that we were two girls crossing the Pacific that they just wanted to come see what we were up to. And this young man, he has a college degree. He's a jewelry artist in Germany. And when our autopilot broke, someone in the community said, oh, the parts are probably laying right below it. They probably just fell off. And we're like, we've gone through 2,800 miles with big seas. The parts aren't just laying below it. So he came over and crawled down there, and the parts were laying there. He fixed it. So sometimes things are way easier than you think. And then this was a German girl we met, and she was a free diver, and we needed to put a zinc underneath our boat. So she goes, I'll jump in. So she did that for us. Then we made friends with this Norwegian family, and that's Kaya, and she's drinking noni juice because she had a little infection she was trying to heal. So we rented bikes on Bora Bora. And these are, the young man on the far left is going to save us in a few minutes in a story I'm going to tell. Jeremy is starting a business for cruisers called Jeremy's Yacht Services. And this is Jorge. And he and his son are traveling the world from Chile. This is their boat, so they have a identical boat to us, but it's 4 feet larger. So we had boat envy, because it had a sail locker, it had things we don't have. But the funny part is, Jorge Jr. is a guide in Patagonia, where I want to go for my 60th birthday, and he's been on those trails like 40 times. But his dad runs a vineyard called Vina Mar of Sauvignon Blanc, and I love Sauvignon Blanc. So my 60th birthday is getting better by the moment. Now, this was a pass. When we were in the atolls, we would go and snorkel through the passes. Well, this day we kind of made a mistake because we went too late, and you can see the current boiling there. So by the time we were ready to paddle our kayaks and take the dinghy back, we couldn't go upstream. That's how fast the current was. So we decided we better have a beer. So that's Victoria from Agatha sitting there. Well, the worst storm squall that has ever hits us in about 2 hours from now. So we're waiting around. Then the storm hits, and we get delivered back to our boat without our dinghies and without our kayaks by the locals because they knew there was no way we were going to get home. So that was like a 4 or 5 hour adventure. And then I met Chris, and he's cruising alone on a catamaran. His wife works for Disney, another person that likes to work while her spouse is out cruising around. So this is on Hiva Oa. So we wandered around, and we found out in the Marquesas, it's where the last place that they were doing cannibalism. So luckily it was about 170 years ago. So we weren't at risk. But it was very fun to go on the islands. And this is us. A sad part of the journey is you make friends, and then you have to say goodbye. And so this is Agatha. They're moving from Seattle to Australia. She's Australian, he's British, and this was when we said goodbye to them. Now, connecting with the locals was also very fun. This is a little girl where that storm happened, and she and I made friends, and then her G.I. Joe fell in the water, and there were sharks all over. So we were debating on which one of us was going to jump in the water and get the little G.I. Joe. And the aunt said, "Bye-bye, G.I. Joe. Do not jump in with the sharks." And then this is Edward, and he lives on an island in the Palmerston Atoll in the Cook Islands, and there's 31 people that live on that island. The ship comes in once a year, and so all of us boaters are on email together, and they ask us to bring them supplies. When we arrive, they host us. They have mooring balls for us, and then they feed us, and that was a great experience. And then we had to get rescued by the locals again because we had a little electric outboard engine. We learned don't take electric out there because these guys were on their commute home from work, and they had to tow us. And they were so cute, we tried to pay them, and they just touched their heart and said no. Now we are in where they filmed Survivor Marquesas. This is on Nuka Hiva. And the flowers were beautiful. And we met this family, and we hiked up to a waterfall. And when we got back from the waterfall, they had prepared a meal for us. And we do pay for this. This is how they make money. But they also grow fruit. And we got introduced to pamplemousse, which are these huge things like a grapefruit. And every day we had pamplemousse with a little banana in it and blended up. And there I am with my supply of pamplemousse. Lots of fish, but again, we're a vegetarian boat, so I didn't eat a lot. But beautiful fish down there. But we did like coconuts, and the sailors have a bad reputation for stealing coconuts. So they go to shore, see a tree, see a coconut, take it. Well, we were told don't do that. So we said, in this little atoll, we're at Ahi, can we get a coconut? And this woman said, take her to my husband's house. So we go over, and this guy right here was so excited to teach us about coconuts. He gave us each a coconut, and he gave us a whole tour of his yard. It was fantastic. At that same atoll, the kids were doing a fundraiser, and they had made all this food, and they were going to another island to sell it. And that afternoon, they invited us, the local church group, invited us to do weaving of palm fronds. And again, we don't speak Tuamotu, and we don't speak French, so we didn't know what we were doing. And they were very kind to us, so we made these. And here were our ladies. And it ended up, we were decorating the church. And the sad part is we had to leave because you can only go out of the reefs at certain times of the day, and we had to leave at 6 the next morning, so we didn't get to go to the church service. So other times we would find fruit and vegetable markets, and this was a young gentleman had cut up a bunch of fruit for us. And if you can believe this, this is half cruise ship and half cargo ship. And so we had heard, now we're in Rangaroa, and we had heard that at 7 o'clock on Sunday, the fruit barge was going to arrive. So we went down there, and literally a fruit barge came in. It was $10 per bag, per bunch of bananas, and we bought a lot of pamplemousse, and someone looked in our dinghy, and I said, it's for my friends. I wanted them to know we weren't just all eating that pamplemousse. And then one day we were going to miss the vegetable barge, and so we called or emailed our friends, Chris, and I said, Chris, we're going to miss the vegetable barge. And so he went to the barge, bought us stuff, and when we arrived, he had it waiting for us. We were very lucky, a lot of outriggers there, and we got to see the 14th annual outrigger race, so 100 outriggers. This is Papeete Bay at Tahiti, and we were just anchored, and on a Saturday morning, all of a sudden, all these outriggers are showing up, and we spent the next 4 hours watching the race. And we were there during the Hiva, and that is their annual celebration in July, so every island we went to had a Hiva festival, and it's their way of honoring their culture and telling the stories. The fire dancing was amazing. And then these little girls were being trained, and they were just fascinated with us. And they were great dancers, and they'll grow up to be the other dancers. So, of course, they had to teach the cruisers how to dance. Okay, so for those that aren't familiar with the islands down there, because people always say, where's Tonga? I think it's not very well known. So over here on the right is Bora Bora, Tahiti, Moorea, which people may have even been to. Then you cross over to the Cook Islands, and the only island we went to in the Cook Islands was Palmerston Atoll. Then we crossed to Niue, which is the smallest island nation in the world. And then we crossed over to Tonga, and you see Tonga right on the side. So the night before our friends, our crew, were arriving to go with us from Tonga to, from Bora Bora to Tonga, we were anchored out here, and there's a new rule in Bora Bora, no one can drop an anchor. You have to be on a mooring ball. So this is a crazy story. Over there is where you can tie up on mooring balls in that picture. Here's the yacht club we're at. We go to bed being told that there's going to be 40 knot winds. We sleep with our radios on. Well, this family from San Francisco, mom, dad, 3 kids, $1.2 million catamaran, they had friends on board, so they knew this was going to happen, and they posted on their Facebook, we're lucky we got a mooring ball because we're going to go out to dinner. But they didn't just go to dinner at that yacht club. They went to dinner a half an hour down the island. 10 o'clock, winds are 40 knots. We're asleep, or at least we're in bed. They come, they get in their dinghy, and they go out, and there's no boat. Right when they are having that happen, there's a mayday on the radio saying there's a red catamaran crossing the reef, aiming at the bungalows over the water. We jump out of bed, but we have a 3-horse dinghy, so we know we can't go do anything. So I call the mooring company. They don't answer. These guys go over to the Norwegians, 2K that I mentioned. They go to their boat. These guys didn't even have life vests or flashlights in their dinghy, and they're world sailors. Now they will. But anyway, they got 2K in their dinghy, and 2K got to their boat first, and the boat was just hitting the bungalows, and they didn't have their key in their ignition. So Kaya and Chell couldn't start the engine. So finally, he gets over there, and they are trying to get it off, and the radio transmissions that he makes might even make me cry today. He was like, I need help. Someone, please come help us. And they were about 2 miles away from us. We couldn't help them. So Kaya and Chell are there, and they put out a sand anchor, and they put the line on the winch, and they start winching it. Well, right as this is happening, and now I'm forgetting his name. He's yelling, "We are hitting the bungalows. We're destroying the bungalows are destroying our boat." And you can hear the emotion in my voice because we're just sitting there unable to help them. So they get it off the bungalows. The damage is all above the water line there. And they are able to motor away, and they came over and tied up at the commercial dock. The next day, totally can't remember his name. He was going around to boats to try to find stuff to put on to patch it so he could get over to where the yacht yard was. And Diana and I look at him and we go, "We have plexiglass." And he goes, "What do you have plexiglass for?" And we go, "In case our windows break. We need something to put on the windows." And he goes, "Can I have it?" And we pulled it out from under one of the bunks and we saved the day for them. But these stories are not unique. There's been so many accidents this year, so many people hitting the reef, that I asked someone, "Is this normal?" And they said, too many newbies, too many people are retiring, buying a boat, and not doing the education and not getting prepared. So I could do a whole hour on the stories of what we saw. So this is a huge topic out there, is finding qualified crew. Normally it's a husband and wife on a boat, and they don't want crew because crew complicates things. But we wanted crew. So this is Heather and Rick. Heather's a school teacher up in Bainbridge. Rick worked 30 years for Boeing, and they came down. And the first night they're with us, we're in Bora Bora. It was the next night after last night when Archer got in trouble. I feel something on my leg, and Diana's shaking my leg, and she goes, "Get up, get up." And I'm like, "Why?" This is like 11:30 at night. She goes, "The bilge is full of water." And I'm like, "Oh my God, the two things I don't want to ever do is run on a reef or sink the boat." So I get up, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's salt, we taste it. I'm like, it has to be coming from my cabin and the propeller shaft. And I open up the propeller shaft, and the water's right there, and it's coming in. Luckily, there were clamps that I could screw and tighten, and the water stopped. But now we had 12 or 15 gallons of water in the bilge that we had to get overboard, and we don't wake up our guests. And so all of a sudden, Heather pokes her head out and goes, "Is everything okay?" We're like, "Yeah, it's okay." So anyway, they did find out that we tried to sink the boat on them. So the story gets a little wilder. So now we're with them. They're going to be with us for 5 weeks. And we go over to another island, Huahine. And every day I'm checking our little prop shaft. And I go to Diana about a week later. I'm like, it's leaking. So you can see the clamps that I tightened last time. But now it's leaking right there. So we got a couple guys to come on board and give us their opinion. And finally, I said, "I'm calling the company in Seattle." They installed it a year before we left. I wanted to know. So I get on the phone with the guy. I'm having the conversation with him, and he says, "Well, you just need to undo the collar, and there's 2 set screws, and you just pull them out, put them back in, tighten it, and water's going to leak into the boat while you're doing it." And I'm like, "You're telling us at anchor to do this?" Okay. So we get off the phone. It's like 9:30 in the morning. Diana and I are having this little talk. Should we, shouldn't we? We had wanted to leave to head to Tonga, and now we had a boat problem again. So as we're having the discussion, I hear Heather go, "You guys, there's some guy up here, and he's going to hit our boat. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's really bad at anchoring." Now, this is not him, but it is his boat. And again, it's a very expensive boat. So the people that are having these problems tend to have a lot of money, but maybe not education. So the guy comes and drops the anchor, but when he goes, and it's windy, of course, it only happens when it's windy, it's 35 knots. When he pulls up his anchor, because he's too close to us, he pulls up our anchor chain. So I look over in 35 knots of wind and see our chain hanging off of his bow of his boat. I jump on the helm, Diana goes up to the bow, he's dragging us to the reef. So what are the 2 things I'm scared of? Sinking and the reef, and they both could happen. If we had taken that part apart, if we had unscrewed that, we would have had no way to steer the boat. No, we would have been in trouble. We were already in trouble. So anyway, that young kid I pointed out earlier, Roger, I know he's on one of the boats. I get on the radio, "Roger, Roger." we need help getting your dinghy and go get our anchor chain off of this guy's anchor. And he's like, what? I go, just go outside and look at what's going on. So he goes over there and some brute strength got it off of there, and we had 150 feet of chain out, and we had to bring it all in. Oh, and then the guy, he left. He didn't even come over and say, hello, Arctic Loon, sorry for causing trauma. So then we end up leaving, and there's weather and all kinds of crazy stuff. Our friends that were ahead of us by 5 days got in lightning, 50 knots of wind, and we were just glad that we had the boat problem and we hadn't followed Pakaloa. So now we're at Niue, which is adorable, but to get your dinghy to shore, you have to lift it up in a crane and put it up on the dock, on the wharf. So it was a big adventure. And then they just had all their family members in their yards all over the island. So we finally made it to Tonga, and I was on a time schedule to get Rick and Heather there for their flight, but I was on a time schedule so I could get here and be with all of you. So Diana was going to stay there. So there's the boat, there's our dinghy, and she's at Big Mama's Yacht Club, and they've created this great space for the cruisers. They grow pearls and make this incredible jewelry you see there. And then Diana's husband flew in. He spent about 10 days with her. Right now, one of her best friends is with her. And then I will be heading back there. So what we have to do now to complete our journey is to go from Tonga out to that Minerva Reef and then over to New Zealand. We're actually only 9 to 10 days away, but you have a weather window. And here's our weather window. The other day, when the action was happening in Tokyo, I was tracking the weather down in Tonga. And what we want is what's on the left there, 15, 25 knot winds, either on our beam or on our stern. But this is what was happening. So every 5 days, these cold fronts come up from Antarctica and circle New Zealand. And that is 50 to 60 knots over there. And so we're hoping that the weather window that will happen at the end of October will get us through to Minerva Reef on one weather window, and then from Minerva Reef to New Zealand on the other window. So we've had incredible growth along the way, incredible scenery, and we have become very strong. You never know what you're capable of until you get out there. We've made incredible friends. Bill and Victoria, they'll be lifelong friends. And Rick, he ended up retiring. Boeing, 5 days before he was going to get on the boat with us, said, oh, your boss quit. You can't go on your vacation. And he's like, I've worked here for 30 years. These people need me as crew. I have to go. So he turned in his retirement papers. So we got to teach him what retirement looks like. And then Robin came. She's an artist, also one of my students, and she wants to go offshore. It's a lifetime dream of hers. So she came down and got to learn. And one of the things we saw was how fragile the ecosystem is out there. So I have to admit, I've only seen a reef that 40% of it was alive. Now, I didn't go to every reef, but that was from Mexico out to the Marquesas. The pearl industries are dying because the water temperature is going up and the pearls can't survive. There's still some very healthy pearl areas, but many families are losing their livelihood. Plus, with the corals dying, the tourism is going to be at risk as well. So we saw problems in Mexico. This is over in Moorea, where they have very specific places where you can anchor. There's a young man who started a coral farm and coral awareness project, and he's now traveling the world. He's 18 years old, to share the need to study the coral and find out what's happening. The fish are there, but they need the coral to survive. This is the algae. There was a huge die-off this year that nobody can understand. This is in Moorea. And plastic is everywhere. And this, they actually tell you to go put your plastic in this yard, and I don't know where the plastic goes when the yard gets full. Also, the nuclear, I don't know if you're aware, but they did nuclear testing, the French, in the southern Tuamotus, where the southeast trade winds did this, and they did it from 1968 to 1995. There's 70 or 80 cancers. The people are suing the French government. It's a huge problem, and we saw it on all the islands. Oh, one more. So we expected to see dolphins, whales, turtles everywhere. And my friends that have been doing this for 20 years, they say the ocean has changed. So we saw them, but we didn't see them in the amount that we expected. What we did see is they are very protective of the turtles. This is Mexico. So when the turtle eggs are born, the volunteers walk the beach every day, find the eggs, go put them in here. Then they watch them, and when they hatch, they help them get to the ocean. So people are making an effort. So now I am heading back. We'll leave on October 20th or so. And the American Sailing Association found out what I was doing, and they've had me write a series of articles about women on the water. And I think what we've learned out there is women need to know they can do this. I think in the past it's always been, oh, if I don't have a husband or a boyfriend, I can't go offshore. And so now I have a new opportunity. This is a friend of ours in Seattle. They did the trip a year before me, and they left their boat in New Zealand so their daughters could go back to school in Seattle. When they were following me on April 9th, I was crossing the Pacific, and I got an email from Satin, and she said, you know, Anne, our boat needs a caretaker, and it's in New Zealand. So after I leave Arctic Loon, once we get to New Zealand, I'll move on to this boat, and for the next couple of years, I'm going to be the caretaker. Except when I go with Deb to Africa on the cruise on Azamara. So that is it. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.